Today we're talking about the INTJ personality. What about this personality type? What are the strengths and weaknesses of the INTJ? What are the cognitive functions that are specific to this type? And what other types does the INTJ naturally relate to? All about that in the next minutes. So please do not forget to like and subscribe, and let's dive in. Right. So initially, let's just explore the 4 letters that describe the INTJ personality. Again, guys, please try to understand that the letters are not really the true way in which we can dig deeper and understand the personality type. They're just there to give us a brief idea of some of the dynamics that people experience within each personality type. So first of all, we have I, which stands for introversion. This means that the INTJ is more likely to draw their energy from the inside rather than the outside. Then we have N, which stands for intuition. This means that when it comes to processing information and understanding the world around them, INTJs are more likely to focus on abstract ideas, on concepts, on ideas, rather than practical, concrete things. Then we have T, which stands for thinking. This means that in the decision-making process, INTJs prefer focusing and prioritizing objective things, logic, facts, rather than the emotional, subjective aspects of experience. And then lastly, we have J, which stands for judging. This means that the INTJ works better in a framework that is more structured, where they have deadlines, where they have things that they can expect. Again, it doesn't mean that they're necessarily more organized. They might be or they might not be. It just means that in their own structure, in their own world, they feel better in a structured, clearer environment. And now, let's discuss the cognitive functions that are specific to the INTJ personality. First of all, we've got introverted intuition. If you remember, we've discussed this function quite a lot in videos like INFJ, ENFJ, ENTJ, and so on. This function is probably the most difficult function to understand because it is concerned primarily with unconscious processes. Introverted intuition is quite good at looking at a lot of abstract information and kind of pulling all of that information together in one single coherent conclusion. And this is something that the INTJ is very good at. Looking at a lot of information, drawing in from various different experiences, and somehow seeing how everything connects and how everything comes together in one single point. They're quite good at generalizing from that kind of information and pulling everything together in such a way that they can somehow create a vision for the future. They're quite good at anticipating what will happen in the future and thinking of various different scenarios that they could be dealing with in the near future or in the further away future. This means that it can be their superpower because they're good at envisioning the future, seeing what might happen and thinking of a way in order to deal with that future. But it also means that they can become a little bit of a control freak and a little bit obsessed with predicting what will happen, which can cause some sort of anxiety. On the other hand, it can also cause arrogance because similarly, just as the INFJ personality can do it, INTJs can also be a little bit smug about this introverted intuition, about their ability to understand things in a deep way and have insights, and they might become quite arrogant, and it is quite common among quite a lot of INTJs before they develop their personality and they grow in maturity, that they might focus a little bit too much on what this introverted intuition brings them, trying to control things too much and somehow becoming a little bit arrogant. This is similar to the INFJ because the INFJ can do it too. It's just that the thinking side of the INTJ makes them even more likely to focus on this quite a lot. The auxiliary function of the INTJ personality is extraverted thinking. This function is primarily concerned with what works for others, and it's very good at efficiency. So INTJs are quite likely to focus on introverted intuition, have their vision that comes from this function and their ability to plan and control, and then they use extroverted thinking to actually make things work and actually draw that information from introverted intuition and apply it into things that actually work in the real world. And then when it comes to decision making, they're quite likely to focus on what works for other people, even if those decisions might hurt other people's feelings. The INTJ is more likely to think, well, I mean, I can focus on their feelings, but I don't really care so much. I want things to work for them, and then the people will notice that I did something that actually helped them. They might notice later, but oh well. And this is where the INTJ is different from the INFJ personality, because I've been asked this question, in the sense that an INTJ is more likely to implement the vision of introverted intuition into more practical decision making and into things that are efficient and work for other people. Whereas the INFJ is simply more likely to apply their vision in social contexts and in relation to how other people are feeling. Someone also asked, why so serious, right? Because the combination of introverted intuition and extroverted thinking can make INTJs look very serious, especially to people whom they're not very close to. And this brings me to my next point. Someone asked me, how do you get to know an INTJ? And I guess it made me smile because INTJs tend to be quite private people. They don't like having big groups of friends usually. And that is because they draw their energy from more close interactions and from their inner world. And all of this can make them look a little bit serious, and they might have trouble relaxing because introverted intuition is pressuring them to do things. It's pressuring them to act and it's pressuring them to work. And then extroverted thinking is drawing all of that things and applying them in the most efficient way that they can think about. Okay, and then we have introverted feeling. This is the tertiary function of the INTJ personality. And if you remember from previous videos, this function is primarily concerned with what is important to me as a person. What are my values? What are my emotions? What is going on in my subjective inner world? It might be the case that the INTJ is not always a fan of focusing on this function, but it's still their tertiary function, not their inferior one, so it's quite likely that they will be relatively okay using it. Balancing between what works for other people and what works for oneself. I mean, what is important for oneself. What works for others in a practical, logical way, and what is important to me in a more subjective way. And the more the INTJ learns to integrate this in their decision-making process, the better they will feel. The more focused they are on living a life that is in tune with their values, the more fulfilled and satisfied with their decisions they will be. And lastly, we have extroverted sensing. This is the inferior function of the INTJ, and just like in the case of the INFJ, it's probably a function that is a little bit more difficult to access due to its opposition with introverted intuition. So this means that when it comes to perceiving the world and understanding information, the INTJ will be very focused on intuition, on abstract things, on ideas, on kind of drawing things into one single coherent conclusion, and they might neglect what is going on right here, right now. They might also struggle a little bit with the fact that they tend to overanalyze things and think too much and plan too much, without actually trying things out, because extroverted sensing is quite good at trying things out, seeing what happens while one acts. In the case of the INTJ, it's usually that they use their introverted intuition to plan, to organize, to think about a lot of potential implications and scenarios, and then only quite later on actually trying things out and going into action. And this is where the INTJ will struggle. And it's an important part for them in order to kind of get a more well-rounded personality. It's important for them to live in the moment, to learn, to try things out, rather than try to plan and control things all the time. All right, and someone asked me if INTJs actually enjoy working or they just put up with it. I mean, it's not something that I could say we could generalize for all INTJs. However, I have actually noticed around me that INTJs tend to be quite hardworking and focused on making things happen. Sometimes they might be lazy in the sense that they're trying to see what is actually important and what is actually worth their efforts, and they might be prolonging the moment in which they actually work and make things happen. However, if the vision of their introverted intuition is aligned with what is really important to them, with what really matters to them, then they can be very ambitious and very hardworking, because NI is actually like a rocket that is pushing you to achieve the things that are really important to you. Someone asked, what is the difference between INTJ and ENTJ? And just as I've explained in my previous video, the difference between ENFJ and INFJ, even though there's quite a lot of similarity between these two types, it's actually the case that the balanced side of the INTJ lies more in their decision making, so between thinking and feeling, but there's a bigger discrepancy between intuition and sensing. In terms of the ENTJ, things are in the other way around. So it might be easier for them to perceive the world in a balanced way, but when it comes to decision making, they're much more likely to simply focus on thinking and neglect the feeling subjective side. How about compatibilities? Well, again, stereotypically speaking, the INTJ tends to get along very well with other types that use intuition as a dominant function. So these would be their fellow INFJs, but also ENFP and ENTP. And the relationship with ENFP is quite stereotypical. You see it all over social media. They tend to have an interesting dynamic. However, as I've mentioned in my previous videos, I believe that it's quite interesting to observe how any personality type relates to other types that use the same 4 cognitive functions, or the main 4 cognitive functions. And in the case of the INTJ, these are ENTJ, ESFP, and ISFP, because they all make use of extroverted thinking, introverted feeling, introverted intuition, and extroverted sensing. And the INTJ can actually learn a lot from ISFPs and ESFPs, because they show the INTJ exactly the part of themselves that they need to integrate better in their personality. So the feeling side and the sensing side. On the other hand, the INTJ might have a little bit of difficulty relating to ISFJs and ESFJs, and this is because they're quite different. They have totally different preferences for sensing and feeling versus thinking and intuition, but then again, the cognitive functions are completely reversed. Again, this is not to say that they cannot have a successful relationship, it's just that it might be harder to get to know each other and understand each other in a deeper, more meaningful way. So thank you guys, thank you a lot for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe for more videos about MBTI, and see you next week with another video.